And hello there, patient travel adventurers, people of the world. Welcome to my channel, Sir Koolzalot. You're cool, I'm cool, we're all super cool. So let's jump on in for today's video. We are going to be reviewing the X6 SECRETSBOX, also known as the 4AllFamily Pioneer Pro. So this is a newer medicine travel cooler system that has just started going on sale in many markets, including the US, and I just happen to have two of them. I have a black model edition and a white model edition. So this video is going to be a first pass review at how this product performs and whether I think it is going to be worthy of patients and their travel needs. So let's jump on in and let me show you what I've got. So as always, I have my disclaimers. All the data that I've collected is my own. All of my views are my own. I'm on a personal quest to find the best medicine travel product coolers that are out there for my travel needs. So let's keep on going. So this will start to give you an idea of what the X6 SECRETSBOX looks like. Of course, a few weeks ago, I posted a video on an X8 insulin cooler. So the X6 is distinctly different. I guess SECRETSBOX have an X numbering system for their different models. It's also been referred to as an upgraded model. I believe the attempt is to upgrade. This is to be an upgrade from the Voyager series, but I'm not 100% sure. So let's see how that plays out. But in any case, this gives you a first kind of look at the product, and I think one thing that you'll be able to see right away is that it has an onboard battery socket, so the battery plugs into the side of the unit directly. The battery that's included is 10,000 milliamp hours, which is claimed to give you about 6 to 8 hours of use, depending on the situation. It comes with a lot of accessories. I'll share more about this in a moment, but depending on which configuration you get, you might get a carrier bag, a USB plug and cable. You obviously get the star of the show, the USB cooler with the aluminium heatsink. There's a thermo flask. You also get this kind of cup which sits over the aluminium cooler. I think this is perhaps to kind of hold the items that you want to place within the cooling unit. And then there's also a sort of a medication bag. There's also a couple of different configurations for the USB unit as well. The kit that I ordered and the sample kit that I received only had this piece, but I think there's a variation of this piece where you just get the upper level, and this is primarily for temperature measuring if you use gel packs or non-electrical systems other than the actual temperature probe itself. So you'll get to see all of this more in a moment. On the 4AllFamily website, there is some product information, and this is the product card that gives you an idea of the capacity, the medicine capacity. So we will put this to the test, but make a note here how it says it can hold 2 Zepbound pens and 1 EpiPen. So this feels on the slightly smaller side in relation to the Voyager XL. But spoiler alert, the aluminium tube of the Voyager XL and this X6 are essentially identical. They have exactly the same capacity. So let's keep on going here, and I'll show you more about that. some more brochure material, just so you can kind of get a feel for it, and feel free to pause these slides if you like. So this starts to give you a little bit of a closer look at the control panel here, and that plastic cup that sits over the aluminium heatsink. I will show you how this control panel works in much more detail in a moment. Alright, so this product brochure was also on the site, but here now you can see this different setup where there's sort of a USB temperature measuring lid with a temperature probe that goes into the cooler. But this doesn't seem to have active cooling. This measures temperature, and also you can set an alarm for the temperature range that you want to monitor. So this is for the gel pack used with the biogel, which you can kind of see here. I did not get this piece with the sample product that I ordered, so we won't be able to test this. As you know, I'm more of a fan of the electrical USB lids anyway, so maybe it's an issue, maybe it's not. And a little bit more on the brochure side. So here, this is quite a nice card because it compares the Pioneer Pro to the Pioneer to the big Nomad Pro. So it looks like 4AllFamily Voyager are in the process of upgrading all of their products, or at least introducing new ones. So the Nomad, they have a Nomad now, it's called the Nomad Pro, and it has this sort of more elaborate temperature monitoring lid. This used to be called the Max, I guess, but now it's called Pioneer. And then here, as you can see, we have the star of today's show, the Pioneer Pro. I don't know why they put a gel pack picture here, because when you just have the aluminium tube configuration, the gel pack cannot fit, so you actually perhaps need the gel pack USB lid to be able to make this work. So in any case, let's keep on going. This gives you an idea of performance. So interestingly enough, on the website it talks about being able to support an outside ambient temperature of -58 to 122 Fahrenheit, which is massive. I did not test this extreme temperature range in this first round of testing. I just wanted to get a good idea of how this unit would perform under fairly typical conditions. So, but I did make a note of this, and I'm going to go back and put this through the heat chamber and other stuff to really give that a test run. So in terms of price, if you want to order this, interestingly enough, on the 4AllFamily site, it's retailing for $279.99, and it's now also starting to appear on Amazon for the same price. And there is a white model and a black model. So I guess depending on what color preferences you have. I have both of these for this video, so you'll get to see a little bit more about both of them. All right, let's keep on going. And if you're curious about what I paid, so just to explain this, I actually have two orders that came from Alibaba. The first one was 2 units, which I'd previously ordered and had delivered a few weeks ago, and I've tested those. And actually, I really quite like this product. I'm really impressed with my initial testing round. So I've now ordered 8 more. From Alibaba, this gets shipped directly from China. It comes by sea freight, actually. And as you know, I've been buying a lot of this inventory from the store Ningbo Creative Gift & Co. They are a reseller for SECRETSBOX. So the products are not branded with 4AllFamily Voyager, but they are the same essential base model. So the units cost $72, and they come with quite a full kit. And in order to ship them, the price for 4 per shipper is $48. So I had to use 2 shippers. So for a price of $96. So that gives you kind of the total price here for this particular lot. So this particular lot of 8 actually, the shipping is underway, so I haven't yet received that yet. So I've only received the first 2 samples, and those were part of a consignment, which here you can now see the picture. So on the left here you can see the 2 boxes of X6, and then on the right here, actually this is the box of X8s. So I ordered another lot of these, and actually I will be posting a video on the testing of these 10 units in a few days, so stay tuned for that. But as you can see, it's quite a large box, so it comes in a carton, and so this carton here is actually 2 boxes that are sealed together, if you can sort of orientate yourself. So when you open it, here's what you kind of see. And then of course each of these units comes with 3 batteries in total, 2 of which are in separate boxes. So here's the batteries. The batteries are of course colored to the color configuration that you pick, black or white. And then when you open the box, you can start to see a little bit what it looks like. So you've got the USB cooler, I got some cooling lids and some gel packs and other things like that. So interestingly enough, this little sample box, so the black sample box came with a bunch of gel packs and other stuff, but the white sample box just came without the gel pack and other stuff. So I think I just got lucky with receiving a unusually packed sample box, because you can't actually use the gel packs unless you have the cooling lid that is designed for the gel pack cooling, and the unit that I ordered only was intended to have the USB cooling lid with the aluminium tube. So, but anyway, I guess I can kind of take a look at that and imagine what that might look like for a future project or use. No harm in having some spares, huh? Alright, so now we're going to start to show some videos so you can get to really feel this product a bit more closely. So there's a couple of different shots here. Then in the main screen you can see that the different gel packs that I had received in the black model box. So interestingly enough, there was a large gel pack with that L shape at the base, and then they also included 2 icicle gel packs with this icicle container, which you can slide those gel packs into. So you'll see me doing that here. And then this container, when you invert it, you can put, you can use it to store medication on the other side. Now this container is obviously actually too wide for the aluminium tube, so it doesn't fit within it. So just a heads up on that. So these gel packs were configured for a different setup that I can't fully test with this sample pack. But anyway, it's kind of interesting to see what the different options might be. And then finally, just opening up one of these battery cases, so you can kind of get to see, you know, how that looks. So nothing too fancy, but these are customized batteries for this particular unit. They have a socket, a dedicated socket. So, and actually the battery itself has a CCC stamp on it, if that's of interest to your travel needs. I'll show that a little bit more closely later on. The video may not do it full justice with the reflection. So just finishing up there, just giving you a quick peek at some of the different accessories, and look at that, they have finally started issuing cables that have that right angle, which is really good for the orientation of the cable when you have a cooler. It doesn't stick out like the original models did. And then finally that carrier bag. So the carrier bag is going to be of an interesting configuration so that it can fit that battery that sits on the side, And so here you can kind of see how that carrier bag is set up. There's sort of a Velcro pouch that opens out, and then you have to stretch it around. There's definitely a little bit of an elastic pull there to stretch it. And then you use the Velcro there to kind of hook it up. So as always, these kind of fairly cheap and nasty neoprene bags are you know, kind of on the tacky side, and I think if I was to travel with something like that, I would totally upgrade that bag to something much nicer. Also, interesting note here, the battery, when you have it on for a while or you put it on a higher power, will produce a little bit of heat. So I think actually some kind of a carrier configuration where the battery side is perhaps more like of a mesh bag or something, so that it can let the heat release, than a bag that has more of a kind of an insulation or an insulatory feel to it might be better. So I'll have to think about that. But anyway, we can get to that at the right point, depending on how this unit performs. Yeah, so just the manual was quite extensive, but I just wanted to show this page in the manual because it's quite handy. On the right side, this is the display panel for the gel pack lid, which I don't have, but on the left side here, there's the display panel for the USB cooler lid. So this is what the unit that I have has. So here you can see there's a battery gauge, there's a active cooling or passive cooling. There is the temperature, there is it plugged in or not, and then there's the power level. There's 4 power levels that you can use depending on what the ambient temperature is. Looking over to the right here, you can sort of see a little bit more about how there's these different power levels for the battery. So, you know, are you 25, 50, 75 or 100% charged? There is the power level, and there's it starts in level 2, but you can cycle it between level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's the is it plugged in indicator. And then I also noticed that there is this is it heating or is it cooling? So this feature here I didn't test out in this video, but I'm intrigued by that, and I'll have to go back and play with that at some future point. So this is just showing the Google Translator at work here to give you an idea of what that text looks like. But I'm going to show you a video to go through this. So don't worry too much if you missed all the details here. So press the middle button and hold, and that powers it on. And then when you press up or down on the side buttons, you can cycle the temperature up or down to the desired temperature that you want to set it to. If you press the middle button quickly, it cycles the power level from low to 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can see how to power it on, with the mains you plug it into the side. There's different plugs depending on how you want to power it. There's a USB plug that's on the side right there, or there's a dedicated one for the battery as well. Now if you press and hold the right button, it will change the temperature gauge from centigrade to Fahrenheit or back to Fahrenheit. So that's pressing and holding the right button. And then if you press and hold the left button, it will switch the display on and off. I don't think I show that in this video. But hopefully that gives you kind of a little bit of a taste of how that panel works. So I'll keep on going. Alright, so this is just to give you an idea of the decibel or the sound level. I didn't use the decibel meter this time. I just recorded that top shot video with the sound, so you could sort of get a feel for it. But the quick version is very comparable to the 4AllFamily Voyager, except that you can also have that level 1 and level 2 power mode, which are really quiet, so almost whisper quiet. So I'm going to replay this video sequence again, and the last step in the video is the one that has the low power mode. So take a moment to sort of re-listen to that. Alright, so let's keep on going here. Alright, very good. And then if you're curious, this just takes a quick moment to look at the white version of the product. So it's basically the same, except that the plastic is all colored white, or with a white colorant. So there's that sort of cup that comes with it that you also screw into the USB cooler, and then the flask will also then screw over that into the USB cooler. So that gives you a quick peek of that. Also note here, it's quite a nice view. You can see the plug for directly powering the cooler, and then also here you can see the plug to charge the battery. So you got two options there. And then on the other side of the battery, there's actually a little USB port where you can run a wire to charge your phone if you wanted to. Well, that's what the instructions say. I would be surprised if a lot of people use that, unless perhaps it's an emergency, because you may not want to drain the battery to your medicine cooler for anything other than maybe a critical emergency. Alright, so now the question of how does this product compare to the others. So on the left side here I have the X6 next to the Voyager and the RX Coolers Mini, also known as the Mini Pro. And then on the right side I've got the Voyager XL USB cooler. And so here now I'm going to sort of do a bit of a head-to-head between them, and you'll get a feel for the size. So here you can kind of see, I'm going to start pointing out, so this is the normal Voyager and the aluminium tube, and then this is the RX Coolers Mini in the aluminium tube, and then here on the right side you can see the Voyager XL aluminium tube. The Voyager XL unit does not fit into the X6 unit. It's just a little bit too small, but interestingly enough, the actual drug product container area are basically the same size. So these are sort of head to head if you're trying to do a trade-off here on which product you may or may not like. Then of course between the Voyager and the Voyager XL there's certainly a leap there in terms of the size or capacity of the product. And then, as you know, the RX Coolers Mini, or aka Mini Pro, is a very small compact unit. Alright, so I'm going to keep on going here. So hopefully you found that interesting. You might want to replay that if you're looking to study some specific details. You can certainly email me if you have very specific questions. As you can see, I've got a nice collection here, so I should be able to answer most of those curious about dimensions and other stuff like that. And of course, let's take a moment to just double check that capacity question. So if you could recall, the brochure says it can hold 2 Zepbounds or 1 EpiPen. That sounded strange because the XL Voyager can hold 3. So I gave that a quick try, and actually the answer is you can put 3 units in here. The way you do it is the base of the Zepbound pen is obviously a difficult one. It's got that triangle system, so you can't feed 2 pens all the way into the tube. But if you have 1 pen pointing down and then two pens in the inverted position, you can basically fit 3 pens in there. And although the base slightly sticks out of the aluminium tube, that doesn't matter because the drug products in the syringe inside the auto injector are a little bit higher up, so it will the drug product part stays within the main cooling chamber, which is great. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a taste of that. And then it then actually said that it could only hold 1 EpiPen, which I found a little bit strange. So I actually have a couple of trainer EpiPens which are identical to the real thing. So here they are. Here's 2 of them, and you can actually, I think you can fit 3 in there. You can definitely fit 2, as you can see here. So the brochure says you can only fit 1. So that's sort of intriguing. Maybe they need to update their brochure, I don't know. Here are some Wegovy pens. There's 4 of them. There's plenty of room for those. One tip with this unit, and I'll show pictures of this later on, is that the temperature probe for the USB cooler actually has a little cable that comes out into the aluminium tube, and I'll show you a picture of that. So when you're packing the unit with your medicine product, I do think you'll have to be a little bit careful that you don't somehow dislodge it or kind of crimple it into the back of the unit, because this little cable kind of runs along one of the sides of the walls, but it's loose. I will show you a picture of that in a couple of slides, so you can kind of think about that. So here are some insulin vials. I have 4 here. These are trainer insulin vials, but they're basically the same. And you can kind of see here that you can't quite stack 4 in a column, but you can certainly get 3. You may be able to stack 4, but it will stick out a little bit. And then I think you can array maybe 4 or 5 per level, so you can probably get a good 12 or so insulin vials in this unit. Let's keep on going. Alright, so now to take a quick look at the battery setup or situation. So as you now know, it has an onboard battery which will dock straight into the USB cooler. So this gives you a little bit of a feel for how that looks in the docked position and then the undocked position. The battery has a little LED light that flashes when it's charging, and then will show you kind of a solid full green when it's charged, and then of course it disappears when you unplug it. And then of course you can actually power this unit via an external battery as well. So you would do that by simply running the cable straight into the cooler itself. In playing around with that, you can apparently or seemingly have the unit powered and also have it charging. And then it seems pretty intelligent, if that's the right word, in terms of if you interrupt the external power, it will detect that and switch to battery mode. But as soon as you reintroduce the external power, it will switch back to the mains mode. So I think this circuitry is very, very nice in terms of dealing with inadvertent power failures and other stuff like that. So you could, in principle, if you want, have this, and I tried this, you can have it plugged into the wall, and it will, you know, continuously run. And then if for some reason the power to the mains stops, it will switch on to battery mode. And then of course you could also have an external battery sit in between that circuit to really you know, have sort of a foolproof system where you have a mains battery backup power and then a fully redundant battery. So this is actually quite cool. I think the downside though is that this battery here is only 10,000 milliamp hours, while in the example here this in-use battery is 20,000. And when you test this out, they clearly are at the right specification. The onboard battery, you know, basically lasts about half the time head to head. I think actually the in-use battery actually performs slightly better than the included battery in terms of overall performance. Other things to be aware of, so here you can see that little cosmetic piece. So if you decide not to use the onboard battery, you can plug in this little cosmetic piece that makes this kind of nice and slick, and then of course you can just run it with an external battery. The setup's this is quite a heavy unit. The lid and the battery and all of this is quite heavy, so you know, head to head between the Voyager or the Voyager XL and the Pioneer Pro, there's quite a bit of a weight difference that you would have to think about when you include the battery setup. You know, if you just look at the size of this battery versus this one, and then you look at the size of this cooling system versus the other one. So perhaps everything is a trade-off. I guess it depends on how well it performs. I will, I'll keep on going. Oh, and maybe a last point is, you know, because of this battery, I think finding a nice carrier bag is going to be kind of important, you know, so a carrier bag that can sit this internal battery nicely and doesn't get, you know, isn't too insulated that it gets really hot, and then has maybe a pocket so that you can hold an external battery as well, maybe some accessories. So that will be some future projects depending on how we do here with this review. And as I promised, just a closer look at that, the battery certification. So, you know, it has all the usual stuff, and then of course here you can see the CCC certification as well. Now I have heard that they're making updates to the formats of the CCC battery logo, and may at some point start requiring QR codes and other things to allow security at airports to quickly inspect products to make sure they're not fake. So anyway, so we'll see how that all plays out. Yeah, and as always, just to give you an idea of the experimental setup that I have. So I did have this unit running for, these two units actually running for a good 2 weeks. I didn't put them through the heat chamber yet. I just had them running at ambient, but interestingly enough, there was a mini heat wave in California. I think you heard about that from that other video I just posted. So I was actually in parallel running these two units through that heat wave as well, to collect a kind of a wide range of data and stuff. So I had a lot of fun. You know, I was using the voltage meters to see about power draw. I was playing around with the units on power. I tested out all the batteries to see how they would perform, whether they were working, and so on and so forth. So did a lot of stuff. I'm not gonna kind of show you the total story here, but I'm gonna give you enough of a taste so you can get an idea of what you will get if you buy this product. For the experimental setup, just using a dummy auto injector pen and using two temperature probes, one sitting right next to the drug product and then one sitting a little bit higher at the tip of the injector. So there's two probes basically sitting in the medicine chamber. yeah, and so this is sort of I guess the money shot, the data shot. So here it all is. So a lot of data, as you can see, probably started around about the 9th of March, and then had this thing running all the way to, maybe the 22nd-ish of March here. So to orientate you on the story, so what you'll want to look at here is this this plot here, which is either a sort of a purple or a blackish plot. These are all the plots of the temperature probes that are either in the white X6 or the black X6. So they all basically were given the same test conditions at any one time. So so it's sort of they are in synchronization. A lot of different things that I sort of did. These little blue areas here, the sort of the blue shades, what that means is the units were on mains power, so you can kind of see where it was plugged in. And then these little brighter light yellowy orange boxes, this means that during those phases the units were on some kind of a battery test. So that sort of gives you orientation. And then of course when there's no boxes, that just means that they were either plugged in or switched off. So here in this upper level you can now see what the ambient temperature is, so you can kind of get a rough idea of where the ambient levels were at the different points in time. So the wave here is roughly sort of the day and night, right? So you can almost count how many days have passed. So you got nighttime, daytime, nighttime. Every time it goes up and down in a reasonable way, it just means it's either daytime or nighttime. And then here you can kind of see the mini heat wave, right? So we were hovering around, and this is in the shade, inside. We were hovering around that 85 Fahrenheit mark on a number of the days. Actually, outside it was hovering more at the 95, 96. I debated taking the unit outside, but because this was my first round, I didn't want to do full stress testing. I didn't want to, let's say, break them yet. So I was on the gentler side. But this is quite rigorous here. You've got kind of a good, testing from 70 to 85 is a pretty reasonable zone for most situations, but not all. So points of interest. So I was trying different settings with the onboard battery. So the onboard battery's got 10,000 milliamps. So when I set it to 2 degrees centigrade, which is the lowest, and I had it on level 1. You can kind of get an idea how it was, it was sort of running for about 7.5 hours. So not the longest of performances, but it is only a 10,000 milliamp battery. So just sort of keep that in mind. And it comes with 3. So in terms of your accessories, I suppose you could multiply everything by 3. So I guess that gives you a total of 21-ish, 22.5 hours. When you nudge the target temperature up to 5, or whether you put it on level 1 or 2, I couldn't really see a noticeable difference with how it behaved. I think those levels need to be more dialed in relation to more extreme temperatures. So forgive me, I don't have grand data on how these level 1, 2, 3, 4s work in this video. This is kind of just let's call it an initial round of trial and error to sort of get a feel for how the product works. Of interest, when you do put it on battery and you hover at the 5C mark, when you're at level 2, the battery seems to last about 6 hours. But when you're at 5 degrees C, but you're only at level 1, so a little bit less, the battery lasts 8 hours. So you can kind of see, it seems like, certainly depending on the power level of the unit is set at, you will burn your battery faster and faster and faster. So it's going to be an interesting balance to get learn how this product works, and then find the optimal spot, because the power level is a manual thing. There's no automation to that, so you're going to have to, I guess, learn how this product works under different conditions, and then go in the field and use it. Now down here, I did do a test run to see how the unit would perform with the Inu battery, which was a 20,000 milliamp hour battery. So at that 5 degrees C mark with level 1, the unit ran for about 16 hours, 20 minutes. So this is not bad. This is reasonably comparable, maybe slightly better than the Voyager. Hard to say. You know, I think what I will do next is I will run the Voyager XL and the X6 in a head-to-head test. So it will all be exactly the same ambient temperature conditions. Everything will be the same except for the units, and then I will have them sit on Inu batteries, and let's see how they run head to head. So future video coming up on that one. Let's see, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to talk about today. Let's see, just checking my notes. Yeah, maybe this one here, so between this one and this one, so the Inu battery going down to 2 degrees centigrade from 5, you can kind of see that it consumes a little bit more energy, but not too bad. You know, you're on level 1, but you're going down to 2 degrees centigrade, and actually it really does do that. You can look at the temperature here. So here the unit is set to be 5 degrees centigrade, and it does exactly that. And then here the unit was set to be at 2 degrees centigrade, or 36 Fahrenheit, and look at that. It actually cools down to exactly the temperature that you set the display panel to be at. So that is really, really nice. This may even negate the issue of needing to have an additional temperature probe within the cooler to get a really good read on what the actual temperature is versus not. We shall see. You know, maybe it's still a good idea to have a secondary temperature system just to maybe alarm you, because unfortunately this doesn't broadcast to your phone, so the apps on your phone can kind of alert you if the temperature probe detects a problem. But the fact that the temperature that's displayed actually quite literally matches the inside core temperature of the chamber is really, really nice. That's the first time that I've seen a product that can really do something like that. It's usually always off by a few degrees. And then finally, the California heat wave, well, mini heat wave, right? So going to 85 Fahrenheit ambient. So here you can see those days, and then here the product was set to actually level 1. So amazingly, I didn't really get strained or put under a lot of let's call it energy stress. You know, you can go all the way up to level 4 if you want to with this power setting. So it was on level 1, and it was set to 2 Fahrenheit, and it totally achieved that 32 sort of basically 36 Fahrenheit mark, which is here. And then as the daytime kind of blipped up and down, you can see it. You know, it kind of was under a little bit of stress with some of these bumps, but not too bad here. And then forgive me, I may have said that this line here was 32 before, but actually this mark line here is 36. So let me just correct some of my notes if I misspoke a little bit earlier on. So you can kind of see this line mark here is 40 Fahrenheit, this red line mark here is 36 Fahrenheit, and then this line mark here is 46 Fahrenheit. So that sort of gives you an idea of what the different scales are. Let me go to the next graph now. So then the question is, how do those two units compare to each other? So this is quite interesting. So what I have here is a really zoomed up quadrant. So this was during the heat wave, and just really looking closely at the data set around that. So here the black plot represents the upper and then the lower probe for the black unit, and then the white plots represent the two probes for the white unit, so black and white basically. So of interest, the black unit is the lower section was a little bit cooler, but the temperature range was a little bit wider than the white unit. So the white unit had a much more targeted, let's call it mean, or overall temperature across the container, and then the black unit had a slight difference of about this is really zoomed in. So you're talking like there's about a degree Fahrenheit of separation. So I don't know whether this is statistically significant or not. Now, one theory that I'd made a note about was I did notice, interestingly enough, that the probe for the white unit was slightly inwards, while the temperature probe for the black unit was somewhat touching the wall of the aluminium tube. Not sure. I don't know whether that's directly relevant, but I was sort of feeling that maybe the exact position of the temperature probe cable that you will see a picture of in the minute could have a slight effect on how the unit's sort of cycling and performing in terms of oscillating on and off over time. I don't know. But I made a little note of that. But in any case, all this looks really, really nice in relative terms for a medicine cooler. These are very, very nice and acceptable. And then, of course, you don't want to go too far below that 36 mark, because 36 Fahrenheit mark, because you'll start to run into the freezing zone when you get down to 32. Alright, so that's all the main data. So let me give you a little bit of a critique of the design aspects of this product. So one interesting thing that and this was just inadvertently through doing nighttime and daytime testing, during the night I sort of realized that the white unit, the display panel was very, very bright when you switch off the lights and it's dark and so on. And so I tried to take a little picture of that. So here on the left side you can see the black unit, and you can see that I guess the black polymer does a nice job of blocking the light from transmitting other than the area where the display panel is. The white unit, the light just basically travels through the polymer. It's sort of like almost semi-transparent, and so the whole front face of the panel basically starts kind of glowing like this. I think that was not intended to be the way it was designed. They will probably need to coat the inside of this unit with maybe a black surface, or put a sort of a piece of material to prevent the light from essentially radiating through the whole structure of the polymer here. So that's kind of interesting. And then similarly, although it looks like it's daytime here, this was sort of a brightened photo. Look at the LED light, or the little green light that flashes for the battery charger, similarly will leak and sort of dissipate its green color throughout the material, the white material. So here are, hopefully these pictures give you a reasonable view of what I'm trying to say. Now just imagine that in these photos here, although the photos have been a little bit lightened for visualization, the room is actually black, and so this sort of gives you an idea of what you would see. So imagine this unit sitting in a hotel room, you know, you basically have a little mini night light sitting there. Now you can switch off the display panel. The snag there though is that one might actually want the display panel to be on, but just be sort of subtle where you can kind of keep an eye out on it. It might feel, you know, one might feel like having the display panel on during the night gives you a little bit of reassurance if you need to quickly check to make sure things are okay. So this may need some design improvements. Here's a video of that. So actually, you know, switching the lights on and off in the room. I made a quick video here so you can get a sort of a feel for that. So lights on and off. So here you can kind of see how the black unit here, you know, is compared to that white. So I think you get the idea. Anyway, so design consideration one, I think the white unit has a bit of a let's call it a design miss in regards to I don't think they anticipated that the whole white polymer was gonna light up at night. I don't know, maybe they did, but I think that's not a good design at the moment. The next thing I want to talk about is the socket for the onboard battery. So this socket here has a lot of plastic material in its construction, other than the electrical connectors for the battery. So, and then when you look at the design of this, a lot of these are sort of like little sort of plastic buttons that you press in and out through plastic deformation. If you know what that means, that's sort of a material science term. So the plastic is essentially elastically deforming back and forth. So over time, that elastic deformation will gradually become more and more plastic deformation, where it will distort more and more and more and more. So these little features here, hard to say, you know, how good they're going to play out in terms of long-term wear and tear. If you're doing a lot of traveling and you have to interchange your battery a lot, I can see these as essentially, you know, at some point they're going to break, basically, if you keep using them. There's no doubt about it. So the question is, how long can you, you know, how many cycles can this connector system undergo before it basically breaks? Now, on the plus side, even if one of these snaps, the actual fit is quite tight with this sort of guide rail, and then also the overall structure here. So perhaps you can actually survive if one of these kind of breaks anyway. I don't know. But I was thinking, you know, if I was using this unit, I would probably have the onboard battery as a backup anyway, and I would probably most likely focus on having one external battery being the main power engine of the unit during the actual live trip. Still debating that one. That might be a mechanics thing once you do travel. Okay, so that's another design consideration. The longevity of this onboard battery system, and the connectors here, and whether they might break or snap at some point, because the whole thing is basically plastic material, and these little plastic tongs here are very, very small. Cool, so I'll keep on going. So here's just another point of interest that I came across. So as you probably saw, there's a plastic cup that you insert inside the cooler, and you screw it into the cooling lid, and then you place over it the aluminium thermal flask cooler. So this plastic cup, actually, when you have switched the unit on and it's been cooling for a while, it gets obviously really, really cold. And of course, because it's plastic, it actually contracts naturally, And when this unit is very cold and you try to remove this plastic cup, it's actually quite hard to do it. You need a fair amount of strength, to the point where if you're not careful, you may, and depending on how you're holding it, if you pull too hard and you're putting the force on where the battery is or something like that, you may risk breaking the unit from shear stresses and other stuff. So the tip here would be, when you're opening this unit up, if it's very cold and you feel like this is very tightly sort of screwed into the USB lid, just be very careful about how you unscrew it and not putting too much force on the battery connector and stuff like that. If you look here under the heat, the heat camera, you can kind of see here. Look how cold the aluminium tube is here, and then look at the temperature profile of the plastic cup, and then here on the outside you can kind of see the thermo flask is sort of more at a higher temperature because it's exposed to the outside. But all these different colors mean that there's different temperature profiles and different materials with different conduction, and dissimilar materials do not always puzzle together perfectly when they are at different temperatures, especially really cold ones. So the metal's going to contract much less than the plastics. So yeah, so that's another design consideration. If it were me, I think I would have made this cup also out of aluminium. It's kind of a shame that they've made it out of plastic, or at least put a kind of a metal aluminium structure around the rim of the cup where it connects with the main unit, so that it doesn't kind of distort too much in different temp conditions. All right, so next I want to talk a little bit about this level 4 power level. So I was still not completely clear on its utility. I think you only use this when you're under very, very high ambient temperature conditions, perhaps ultra desert sunlight type stuff. I will need to dig more into the manual and stuff, but the thing that I want to mention about this is that when you do set the unit on this high power mode, the battery will burn very, very quickly, within about 1 to 2 hours basically. And the other thing that I noticed was that the moment you put it on battery, the battery gauge falls very quickly to level 1, but it just sort of sits there, and then the clock timer sort of does its thing regardless of what the battery level is actually showing. And what's also interesting was that the black unit fell to the level 1 battery, the level 1 display much quicker than the white one. So the white one was more progressive, but it also very quickly trickled down to that level 1. So I was trying to decide whether the electronics were just a little bit glitchy or a little bit off in terms of their ability to really succinctly or clearly measure the battery's capacity during this level 4 very high kind of power load. Let me play you some stuff here. So there you can see me cycling that power level from 1 to 4, and then notice how the moment you plug it in, the power level auto drops to level 2, and then once it does that, you can only select a level 1 or a 2. The level 3 and the level 4 are not available when you plug it in. And then here I'm doing the same with the white unit. So when you plug it in, it defaults to that level 2, and then note again how when you plug it in, only levels 1 and 2 power are available, but when you have them in the battery mode, levels 1 through 4 become available. I'm not completely clear on why that does that. If you happen to have this unit and perhaps have already had a look at it, yeah, maybe we can have a little chat about this, but I'm going to have to explore the mechanics of this power level setup in much more detail. And let me now play you this one. So what's also then interesting is what I'm showing here is that what happened with these units, so they were running and they were on the level 4, and they actually basically went down to level 1 and started flashing that they were about to imminently run out of power. The moment you plugged them in, the little gauge jumped up 1 level, and so it sort of went up a level. Not entirely sure whether that was, I don't know what you call it, sort of a glitch with the programming or the electronics, because there's no way the battery will have increased its charge by like 25% within 1 second of you simply plugging the unit in. So I think there was a little bit of a programming glitch in regards to this. So just it's sort of interesting to see. Maybe these were test units anyway, so perhaps the commercial units don't do that. But I've made a note of all of this, and we'll sort of follow up. But that said, the level 4 power thing, I honestly don't think there's going to be many situations. Level 3 and level 4, I don't think there's going to be many situations where one's even going to need to do that. All the stuff that I did was with the level 1 and the level 2 anyway. So just something to keep in mind. But I do want to learn more about what level 3 and level 4 can offer in terms of this product. I think that's the most of my notes here, but just maybe to mention that when you are on level 4, you're looking at 2 or 3 hours tops, maybe even less, before you get a full battery drain. So it's really cranking out at this point in terms of the fan and stuff. So all right, so cool. And then the next sort of design consideration I'm going to mention is the temperature probe. So here you can see, so here you have the USB cooler with the aluminium. Here's that cup, the plastic cup. Here's the thermoflask. So there's basically a little temperature probe wire that runs to about here, if you can see my mouse. And then when you look at that, from the top view into the tube, here you can see that sort of probe, and then here's what it looks like as a close-up. So note how this one, there's a little bit of a cable, and then the little probe here is slightly touching the aluminium, but it's slightly twisted into the container, and it's just sort of loosely sitting there. It's fairly rigid. The wire is fairly rigid, and so it can sort of hold itself upright, but it is a little bit distorted. I think it might be worth paying a bit more attention to this. Perhaps if you push some medicines in there, you might accidentally, sort of fold it over and push it to the back wall, or kind of distort it, or somehow. I guess one has to be careful not to damage this piece. And then I was also debating the idea of, well, if it's sitting snug against the wall, the aluminium is clearly going to touch the probe itself, and so it will be basically measuring the temperature of the aluminium. So would it be better to have this probe not touch the wall directly? So it might be worth, this might be worth a little bit more attention. Maybe it's worth putting a little bit of I was going down 2 pathways. Would it be worth putting a thermally conductive tape over this and making sure it's fully stuck to the wall, or putting a small layer of insulation between the probe and the wall so that it doesn't measure the immediate temperature of the aluminium right by where the pelleter plates are? So kind of, it's sort of measuring a cold spot So I'm not sure. I think I'm inclined to say that I would probably put a little bit of insulation tape just right in this section here on the wall, so that this probe is more truly measuring the temperature of the chamber. So, and I think perhaps I was looking at the other, this was the white one, the black unit. This was actually not touching, so that it was in a slightly different position. So I think this could introduce interesting measuring variability. So heads up on that. We'll probably need to give this a little bit more attention to make sure that it's always producing the correct temperature. And so now I'm going to go back to my previous statement where I think it might be valuable to have a secondary temperature measuring probe inside, just in case something happens with this one. Just trying to think if I've covered all my, yeah, I think I've covered all my notes on this one, so I'm going to keep on going. And so then, you know, the grand finale here, just some visuals of the thermal camera. So, you know, I studied this quite carefully. This is a little bit more for, you know, graphical show more than anything. Didn't find anything unusual. The thermal distribution looked very reasonable in terms of the very cold area right near the cooling plate, or the hot areas where the electronics are and the batteries and stuff and the wires and the ports. So everything looked pretty reasonable. The only thing I would draw your attention to is when the unit was on the higher power mode levels, you can almost see them here on the thermal, the battery will start to get warmer and warmer and warmer. So look at this one here. And so I think I would definitely be careful not to use a carrier bag that is highly insulated, that wraps around this battery, because I think you could end up risking getting a bit too much heat buildup. So I think the idea of perhaps having like a mesh here, or an opening to let the heat from this battery kind of vent outwards will be a good move. And then right where the socket is, look at that, it does seem to, you know, definitely gets quite hot there. So yeah, so that's something to sort of think about with that. And so the big question, right? To X or not to X? To chai or not to chai, right? So we got some quite cool products that we've checked out. We've got the X6 here with the Pioneer Pro. We got the Voyager XL. We've also got the Chi Tai Tai, if you remember that unit. So all of these are very comparable in terms of capacity. The question is then, you know, which one wins, or maybe they're all winners depending on the scenario. So I had a first pass at what I think. I have to be honest and say though that I'm not fully decided yet on the X6. I am wowed. I really love the control panel, and I also really love just the temperature control as well. It's really nice. That said, the price, no, there's something wrong about that, but I think that might be more the price gougers in the US market that are causing that than anything. The weight of the X6 is definitely much heavier, so as a airplane travel cooler, that might be on the line of, it might be a bit too big. I will debate that one a little bit more, but that said, the results of this initial test are really impressive, so I would definitely commit to maybe doing one trip with this to give it a try. But I think head to head, the Voyager is a much more slicker, compact system. And then, as I noted, I think durability might be more questionable with a more elaborate system. You know, all those buttons, all the plastic, all the parts that are kind of docking and undocking and connecting and all of that. we shall see how that plays out in terms of longevity. And then, as I noted, I shared a range of my initial design impressions, and so I think there's a few things that need to be done to really lift this one up to an optimal level. And then, as you know, I'm a pretty big fan of the Chi Tai Tai. I was not a big fan of the XL model. I had previously tested that and had not favorable results, but as you saw from one of my more recent videos, it does seem like they've put a bit of work into upgrading and improving that. Right off the bat, they added like the little screw cap. I think they redid the programming of the cooling system so that it was at a lower mean and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to give you a strong yes or a no yet. But what I will say is that I am certainly very impressed with what I'm seeing. I do think there's a little bit of design work. So why don't you share some comments? What do you think based on what you've seen? Would you like me to do some specific testing? Let me know. I'll be happy to do a few more rounds on this one to put it through its paces. I will keep on going. Yeah, so in summary, so this unit, so the X6 performs very nicely at 70 to 85. So that's a thumbs up for state travel and domestic travel around the US. So outstanding temperature control. The power efficiency is pretty reasonable. I like how you can have an external battery as well. I like how it, when there's power interruptions, it will switch to battery mode or internal battery mode and all of that cool stuff. So that's really, really nice. I'm not too sure about some of the design features yet. All the plastic parts and different things like that. How rugged is it for international trips and different things like that. But certainly, I think it will do the job. So I've left a question mark for international travel because it is bulkier. It is a heavier unit compared to the Voyager, and I have to say it is nice to be to travel with an as compact as possible of a setup. And then finally, in terms of the claimed temperature profiles, I did not test it down to minus 58 or plus 122, so I'll leave that as a question mark for now. But within the 70 to 85 Fahrenheit zone, this unit will definitely do a good job. And I will start to wrap up now, and just again, I will send a little bit of a plug. We have got a Discord server up and running, so there's a community that's forming, and feel free to come on by and chat with fellow patient travelers. We'd love to have you. And it's just being formed. We're just getting up and running. So if there are topics you want to cover, or if you want to take ownership of one of the forums, you're very, very welcome to. And then, of course, I do fully understand that us being all patients as well, sometimes privacy and discretion is actually the most important thing. So this is not mandatory. It's just something that can help if you want. And I'm not going to bore you with the store, but there is the community store. So I have inventory that's been fully tested, and if you would like to take dibs on any of that, you're very welcome to connect, and I can let you know what I have. But this is just a very small store on the side for the community. So as you know, I'm not a big fan of the price gouging that's going on in America, as well as the poor quality. So this is just a way to help the community look after their medicines and get really good prices, import prices. Yeah, and so that's a wrap for today, and so I hope you found this first look at the X6 cooler, aka the Pioneer Pro, interesting. And I have a feeling you'll have lots of questions. This is just a first pass. I will be doing more testing and more extreme testing, and also doing some head-to-head comparisons between the different products. So more on that soon. Wishing you a wonderful day, and talk to you again.